بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم اللهم أعلمنا بما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Moving right along in our book Understanding Allah's Names and Attributes. Last class we talked about Al-Razzaq, Al-Raziq, the provider. We talked about the different types of provision of Allah, the ones that are general to the entire creation, which Allah does not discriminate. He doesn't withhold from anybody categorically. Both sinner and saint He gives to, children, wealth, livelihood, sustenance. And then the specific type of provision that Allah withholds or keeps separate for the believers. This is the provision of guidance and faith and the tranquility which proceeds from faith, which is what we call salam. When we say salamu alaikum to each other, it's true that in a bare bones linguistic translation it means peace, but it's not just any type of peace. Like one of the first things we say after we finish the salah, after astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam. Oh Allah, you are the peace. You are as-salam. Wa minka salam. And all peace, as-salam, is from you. So when we say salamu alaikum to other people, we're not just wishing them a type of peace that is commonplace, such as free from harm, security. That's there too. But more significantly, what we're asking Allah to grant people, because it is a prayer, is the type of tranquility and inner peace that proceeds from faith in Allah and harmony with your purpose that Allah created you for. And that is something that is only attainable by the believer. And it's not something that's attainable just through sort of exterior means, right? It's like taking you out of a dangerous neighborhood and putting you into a safe one. That's an easy fix. Installing a security system on the door, that's an easy fix. Bolting the doors and the windows, buying locks, these sorts of things are very easy to do. That's the worldly security. That's the worldly safety. However, the tranquility of salam, and it's not even our name tonight, but we'll get into it again once we get to that name of Allah. The tranquility of the salam that we're asking for is something that can't be bought, something that can't just be so easily obtained through applying or purchasing or installing the right technology. I do X and I will get Y. It doesn't work so easily. To have faith and to struggle with faith and to walk the journey of faith, trusting that one day, hopefully in this life, if not in the next, Allah is going to give us the tranquility which proceeds from that faith. Some of us taste it in this life, and those who have tasted it generally reflect that they taste it in relationship to the amount that they sacrifice for their faith, right? Because it's easy to kind of wear our faith proudly when it is smiled upon. But it's difficult to wear our faith proudly when it's going to be frowned upon, when it might limit our prospects or our success or what other people think of us. That's not to say that we're going around picking fights, right? We're not trying to be contrarians. But our sense of validation and vindication is not external to us, in the sense that it's not in other people around us. We're not looking for their approval. If they give us their approval, alhamdulillah, great. We're not out to stick it to them, to scorn them. We don't take their sign of approval of us as an insult, no. But we also don't obsess or grasp at their approval to the point where we're going to change what it is we believe and what it is we do in order to get it. That wouldn't be in harmony with the tranquility that Allah is talking about. The type of person who's dependent on other people for validation has no tranquility. They're always concerned about what other people think of them. Oh, I wish I had said it this way. Oh, I hope I didn't offend them. Oh, man, I really put my foot in my mouth, or I really did the wrong thing here. That's not tranquility. That's not salam. The salam that we hope to get is the salam that proceeds from faith. And faith often takes sacrifice. Allah says a couple different times in the Quran, the beginning of Surah Al-Ankabut, the 29th chapter of the Quran, do the people of faith think that they will be left alone to say, I believe, and not be tried or tested? Every single one of us has tests, we know it. But those tests, once we get through them, that's how we get, inshallah, the tranquility of faith, as-salam. And that's what we hope for other people when we say Salaam Alaikum. Look at that. That was just a complete unrelated aside. First name for the night is Al-Ahad. Actually, it's a group of names. Al-Ahad, Al-Waahid. Does anybody know? Okay, I'm assuming you've heard of these names before. Al-Waahid, Al-Ahad. What's the difference between the two? I'll give you a hint. They both have to do with the number 1. But what's the difference between Al-Waahid and Al-Ahad? Qul huwa Allahu ahad. It's probably one of the most used surahs that you recite. Al-Waahid means the one. Very good. That's true. What does Al-Ahad mean? The other one? Al-Ahad means the unique. Allah. Ya salam. Very good. That's right. Al-Waahid means the one. It's possible that there could be other ones, right? Al-Waahid. Huwa al-Waahid alladhi fa'al kada. He's the one that did that. It's possible to say that. Just like earlier names that we talked about, Al-Khaliq, we could say Khaliq al-Masna'a, or we could say the one who created this thing. Or Raziq, or Rabb, of this thing or that other thing, and how if it's qualified, it could be applied to other people, right? So that's kind of like Al-Waahid, the one. However, Al-Ahad is something that means more than just being one. It means being utterly unique. Al-Ahad. And so Ahad is only appropriate in this form, Al-Ahad, for Allah, because He's the only one that's completely unique. There's a degree to which people are all unique, right? Let's say, well, even on the DNA level, right? If somebody has twins, technically they're not so unique. But everybody has a fingerprint and an iris scan and these sorts of things. But that's not the type of uniqueness that we're talking about. The type of uniqueness that we're talking about with Allah's name Al-Ahad is both in details, but also a categorical uniqueness. It's a uniqueness that runs through everything. that has to do with who Allah is and what Allah does. We can start by saying that Allah is unique as an entity. And He is one. There's not multiple. There's no trinity in Islam. We don't believe that what is truly divine is divided over separate entities, or entities that are somehow separate and somehow the same. No, He is one. And that one is unique. He is both the most merciful and Shadidul Iqab. He's also strict in punishment, or severe in punishment. We don't believe in a God of mercy and a God of punishment. So He is Ahad and Wahad in His entity. It's all one entity. It's all one being. That is Allah. And Allah is unique in His characteristics, both in the fact that He is able to do or able to have those characteristics in the first place, such as to forgive people. We say, I forgive you, right? Somebody wrongs us. But what we really mean specifically is that I'm not going to like hold a grudge against you. I'm not going to consciously treat you any differently going forward for what you did. But we don't have the power to forgive people in a spiritual sense, right? I always come back to this conception of our spiritual world is part of the created world. And just like, we have the law of gravity in our physical world, we have spiritual laws as well. You do certain things, and your soul actually becomes purified and becomes better. You do other things, and the opposite happens. It becomes less clean, less pure, becomes covered over. These are just as E equals MC squared. These are givens of the created world. So when it comes to forgiveness, the ability to forgive in the ultimate sense, like we're talking about, wipe that stain away from your heart and your soul, and to ensure that it's not going to result in a consequence after you die. That type of forgiveness is something only Allah can do. Nothing else can achieve that. So this is where Allah's unique power, the ability to create, again, we talked about this under the names of Khaliq al-Khallaq, to create in the primary sense where He brings about something that didn't exist before. That's something no one can do except Allah. So all these sorts of things are unique to Allah, His actions and His qualities, but also in the degree, right? We can talk about maybe there's some sorts of qualities that seem to have a commonality with qualities in our creation, such as knowledge. We have knowledge. Other beings have knowledge, varying degrees of knowledge. Allah's knowledge is unlike our knowledge in that it is completely unique. Unique in what? Unique in its perfection. It has no holes, it has no deficiencies, it has no weakness, it has no conflict of interest, it has no fault. Allah sees, Allah hears, Allah is informed. All things that have a commonality with activities that we do. But the way and the how much of how Allah does these things is completely unique. Because of this uniqueness, Allah is unique in His right or His deservedness to be worshipped. This is the entire linchpin of Islam. This is the one thing we hang our hat on, different from every other faith tradition, religious community, whatever you want to call it, in the world. That Allah is uniquely divine, and so he has unique right to be worshipped. That nothing else can claim the right to be worshipped because it is not unique. It does not have this unique divinity. Or better yet, it does not have this uniqueness of qualities and characteristics and activity. Therefore, it is not divine. Therefore, it is not to be worshipped. Because worship is reserved for that which is unique. Another kind of implication of this uniqueness is that Allah is incomprehensible. We can't truly understand all of the nitty-gritty details about Allah's being or Allah's activity because he is singularly unique. Now, this doesn't mean that Islam is kind of like an obscurist religion. Like I would put Islam as the middle path between like a hyper-rationalism, right, that could imagine that we can know everything about the divine. How does Allah know? How does Allah see? How does Allah calculate? How is Allah informed? By what means, if there are means, and to what degree, and how much, all these sorts of things. That would be kind of like an extreme on one side, imagining that we could know all of that. And then the other extreme is kind of like the religion of mystery, which is what many Christian traditions boil down to, where you can't even necessarily hold them to a principle of, say, okay, Allah is everlasting, how can he die on a cross? They say, well, it's a mystery. We don't know. Well, Allah is free from need. How could he have to eat and sleep? How could he get tired on the seventh day and need to rest, supposedly? Well, it's a mystery. We don't know. Right? You see how that's kind of the opposite extreme, where everything that seems to contradict or seems to not be coherent is just, well, put your hands up and we don't know, we can't know. It's all a mystery. How is Allah one but three? That's the big one. It's a mystery. We don't know. We can't know. So Islam is in between these two extremes, right? Because Allah gives us criteria in the Quran to define what is divine. We talked about this in the khutbah a couple of weeks ago. Allah tells us divinity has to speak because it has to be able to communicate guidance. And it has to be everlasting. It can't be temporary. And it has to be all-powerful. It can't be weak. And it has to be all-knowing. It can't be ignorant. It has to be all-informed. It can't forget. And so on and so forth. All of these sort of qualities which are must-haves that shape what divinity is. So we take from Revelation the criteria, and then Allah tells us, go out and apply it. And you'll find that what is divine, Allah, meets all of these criteria and nothing else can. Because everything else is part of creation. Therefore, it's temporary. Therefore, it has needs. Therefore, it is limited. So in Islam, we have this kind of revelation-based rationality, principles to apply, things that are supposed to make sense. But Allah has informed us what we have to know for our salvation. And he hasn't informed us of anything just for our curiosity, just for trivia. So when it comes to the finer points of how does Allah see? How does Allah hear? How does Allah decide or will All of these sorts of things, these are things that are beyond our scope. These are things that Islam says, we can't know. Not only don't we know, we can't know. So we're between these kinds of two extremes. And if you're ever looking for an analogy, there's this interesting way where in our culture and society, we forget that our mind has a material foundation. Our mind is fundamentally material, right? Kind of like we forget when we use the internet that it's all servers and wires somewhere in a shack or in a huge whatever. Cloud services, right? Even the language that the IT industry uses kind of is trying to hide the fact that there's a material aspect of this thing. It does exist with wires and electricity and components and plastics and things like that. Well, our mind is kind of the same thing. We talk about the mind, and we can lose sight of the fact that it's actually based in a material creation, right? It's actually all right up here. If we remember that it is material, fundamentally, then it's way easier to accept that it has limits, right? And there's two types of limits. So I give the analogy of like a weightlifter. So if you go into the gym and let's say I've never lifted weights a day in my life, okay? I go to the bench press and I put on 100 pounds on the bench press. I'm probably not going to be able to do it. Maybe I will. Maybe I'm, just blessed, but probably not going to be able to do it. That's my personal limit. Okay, but is everybody in the gym limited in the same way? No. Somebody in that gym can bench press 100 pounds. So there's limits, there's personal limits that are different from individual to individual. But then there's categorical limits. Can anybody in the world bench press 4,000 pounds? No, we can't. Why? Because our muscles have a material existence, and those material muscles of ours have hard and fast limits. There's a certain point at which no one can go beyond. Doesn't matter how much you lift, how strong you get, how many whey milkshakes and protein shakes you drink. You're going to have a limit someday, and everybody will. And so the mind is no different. What the mind is able to achieve is going to be different from person to person. There's going to be individual limits. Somebody's going to be smarter than me. They're going to be able to understand something quicker, faster, remember it better. And then there's going to be some people who maybe aren't as intelligent as me, and so it'll take them longer, or they won't get it, or they need it really broken down and explained in a really, really nice, simple way. But then there are some things that are just beyond the pale. Some things that are just so far beyond the limits of what our human brains can even fathom, that no one can, nor will ever be able to understand. So whenever we get into how questions with Allah, these are these types of things. How does Allah see? How does Allah hear? How does Allah decide? How does Allah judge? How does Allah know? These are all things that are beyond our categorical and collective ability to grasp with our created intellect. And so that is part of Allah's uniqueness, his incomprehensibility. The machine can't understand its creator. We're more than a machine, alhamdulillah. I don't like to use too many machine analogies with people, but we can't truly grasp our creator either. Allah is unique in his freedom from flaws and limitations, due to a consequence of all of these kinds of qualities, attributes, characteristics that we're talking about. He is unique in his free from flaw, his free from limit, his free from deficiency. Everything else in this world, everything else that exists is created and therefore limited in its activity. We talked about this many classes ago. I don't know. I know that the Sheikh family isn't here today, so I'm going to ask all of you all. Does Allah have any limits? Are there certain things that Allah can't do? And why? The hint is that this is the response to the age-old question that atheists like to ask, which is, could Allah or God create a rock that's so heavy that he can't lift it? Does Allah have any limits? Okay, so Cyrus says no, straight up. And the other answer we have is he only cannot do or would not do things that are not befitting to him. The next answer is no, because he is the creator and set the boundaries and limits. So he set the limits, so he has no limits. Okay. Here's the question. Can Allah forget? Can Allah forget? No, he's all-knowing. No. Isn't that a limit? Someone says to you, wait a second, you told me, your teenage son, I always give the teenage son because I was that argumentative teenage son. Your teenage son comes to you and says, you told me that Allah has no limits. Well, Allah can't forget, so there you go. There, he's limited. He can't do whatever he wants. What would you say? That's because our simple minds think that as a limit, when in fact it's an amazing ability we can't even comprehend. I think between your answer there and your answer before, I think we have it. When you said that no, he is all-knowing. Right? So you didn't just say no. Because if I said, can Allah forget? You said no. I'll say, oh, that's a limit. You say, no, he is all-knowing. Right? So what we're really getting at is that Allah has an identity, right? That identity is shaped by his characteristics. And those characteristics have consequences as to who he is. Allah can't forget, not because it's a limit of his ability, what he's able to do, but because it's a consequence of who he is. The consequence of Allah being all-knowing, perfect in knowledge, is that he can't forget. And as was just said, that's not actually a limitation, even though that's the whole kind of gotcha of how the question is set up, is that it's made to seem like it's a limit. It's not a limit. How is being perfect a limit? Being perfect is not a limit. Not being able to be weak is not a limit. Not being able to be overcome, forgetful, blind, ignorant is not a limit. Actually, it's a consequence of perfection, right? So there's a difference between who Allah is his identity, and what he can do. And if there's something that Allah cannot do, like forget, it's simply a consequence of who Allah is and an aspect of his perfection. So remember that for your future teenage son, inshallah. So there's some consequences to Allah's oneness. If Allah is unique, if Allah is one, then it automatically eliminates certain things. It eliminates the necessity of idols or partners, right? We talked about how other religious traditions, they take the divinity, the divine, and they break it up and spread it out over different entities. So you're going to be the God of creation. You're the God of forgiveness. You're the God of the rain. You're the God of the crops. You're the God of this, love, romance, relationships. No, if Allah is one and he's unique, then it automatically disqualifies any sort of idol or any sort of partner. It also disqualifies any type of intermediary or middlemen. Saying, well, you can only get to Allah if you go through this person first. You have to ask the person in the grave. And Allah will forgive you if you ask the person in the grave. How is Allah unable to forgive directly such that he would require a son, another God, a saint, in order to forgive you? If Allah required it, then it would be a need from his end. Then Allah is free from need. There is no need for any intermediary because Allah is completely unique. We also covered this. It also eliminates the ability to completely grasp and comprehend the how of Allah's nature. How does he achieve what he does? How does his activity happen? We can't fully know. And this is a consequence of his being one and unique. It also precludes or it eliminates the possibility of Allah making any sort of mistake, Allah having any sort of flaw or fault or shortcoming, which is what we kind of got into just a bit. And anybody who falls into the above, anybody who assumes that Allah, or incorrectly assumes that Allah made a mistake, or Allah is at fault, or Allah is to blame, anybody who worships an idol or uses an intermediary or a saint or somebody, a dead, deceased person or something like this, anybody who imagines that they can know concretely how Allah does his activity, they have made a mistake in grasping his uniqueness. That's the root of the issue. His tawheed, his uniqueness, they have not understood his uniqueness well. And so if they don't understand the uniqueness, they're going to make one of these types of mistakes. This is actually what Allah says in the Quran. He says that they didn't estimate Allah a just estimate. لا يقدر الله حق قدره. They underestimated Allah. They thought that they knew who Allah was, but they underestimated his uniqueness. They underestimated his power and his perfection. And so because of that, look at the fruit that bore from that seed. Either straight up idolatry or something less than that. We have a comment. I think the concept that God created us in his quote unquote image sometimes confuses that teenage son. But subhanAllah, you can't put the creator into any type of comprehensible image. Yes, this is a big thing. And we have, I think, 2 minutes here remaining. So I'll try to be brief. But when it comes to the dominant culture, we mentioned in the khutbah this weekend about controlling what's normal, right? We're living in a culturally Christian society, even if Christianity is kind of not so popular anymore. A lot of the cultural baggage that people are operating from, a lot of the things they're reacting to when they think they're reacting to religion capital R, or organized religion, the great boogeyman, is really reacting to Christianity and Christian culture, not religion as a whole, not other religions, not what we would say is the true faith. And so you'll find a lot of this predominant kind of imaginary of who Allah is that he's this big bearded white dude in the sky. Pretty much, right? That's going to throw down thunderbolts if you slip up. So this conception is everywhere. It's in books, it's in movies, it's in television shows. I mean, this society does not fear consequences, divine consequences, enough to refrain from representing Allah in movies and pictures and things and animations and things like that. And so we have to be careful. We have to be very sensitive to the images and messages that are getting communicated to our children. Even in cartoons, things that are intending to joke and intended to not be taken seriously, they're often taken seriously, or they have a residual effect. Our children might even grow up with a Christian conception or a culturally Christian conception of who Allah is, just from osmosis, just from the media that they consume and the friends that they have and the other children that they meet with. It's possible. So you're right. So it is important to stress the difference between the conception of divinity that we have in Islam versus other faith traditions. Ours, in my study, is the only one that's unassailable, that has no holes in it. If you go to the other ones, then yes, it necessitates all of these, just like you're kind of alluding to, it necessitates either these kind of mental gymnastics, or it leaves itself open to be mocked because of the consequences are unsavory. We're going to get cut off any second here. Does anybody have any final comments, questions, concerns? I'll thank you everyone now. If anyone's typing anything, I'll thank you now for your participation and your attention. And may Allah accept it from us and continue to educate us, inshallah. And thank you, and I'll see you again next